Outa-space, International Arts and Class Struggle podcast. On this week's show, portraits of a trade unionist, comment and views from the space station, and music from Erin Byrne, Acupuncture, Wine and Cigarettes. Okay, so today we have Suzanne Muna, who's a trade unionist, a member of the Socialist Party in England and Wales. She's an illustrator, a cartoonist, and a painter, and also a housing activist. Hi, Susan. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. Very good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for coming on the show. So that's who I've introduced you as. You know, can you expand on it a bit more? What's your, what do you do? What's your thing?
Yeah. Well, I've been working in housing for about the last 20 years or so, and most of that time, in fact, within a year of getting a job in housing, I became a trade unionist. And really spent most of my time on trade union activities. And also that expanded into kind of wider housing activism. It's such a huge issue. You will know this, and you will know this in Spain as well. There's been a huge housing movement there. It's a crisis everywhere. So obviously that takes up a lot of time. So I do try and do, art as well as my sort of something that is opposite to that takes me out of myself a little bit. Strictly amateur artist, but just try and fit that in around all the other things that are going on.
Well, we'll come back to the question of whether you're an amateur artist or not later on, and also maybe we'll develop the points around trade unionism. I mean, one thing that hits me on the housing question, just first of all, is that for a lot of artists who struggle financially, then homelessness is a real issue. And not having a place to live, not having a studio, those kind of questions. But it reminds me of, well, one of the reasons I got hold of you is because I saw that you did in the lockdown. You did a series of pieces of art that were called the Lockdown series, I believe.
Yeah. And
one of the things I'm exploring right now is, the relationship of the artist in the lockdown. How have we responded, and what kind of things are being produced. And I saw your work. I thought, fucking hell, that's great. I really liked.
Thank you.
No, I did. I really liked. I mean, I like your art anyway. I knew what you did in general, but I thought you captured some really interesting moods with that series of work. I mean, could you expand on that a little bit and give us a bit of an idea of what this series of work was about and explain? Obviously, for people that are listening, they can't see it, so they can go on the other social media on our Facebook group, and all the images will be there for people to look at. So, could you explain some of the images and what you were trying to capture?
Yeah, well, just prior to the lockdown, I've been doing a series called The Rising Album. So that's what I'd been mainly working on beforehand, which is I do go along to a lot of protests, as you can imagine, a lot of protest and lobbies and demonstrations and things like that. And I've been doing, you get certain features that are common to all of them. You get the paper seller, you get, the leafleter, so I was trying to capture these kind of typical, but individual portraits of people on protests, and that I'd really been enjoying doing that. And of course, that completely stopped when we went into lockdown. So I put out a sort of call on Facebook, just saying I was interested in doing portraits of people, some aspect of them being in lockdown, what it had meant to them, or in some cases people are still working, obviously. And it's just that they've had to adapt the way that they work, and got back some really fantastic, so great to see the images that people had sent. some of them are quite humorous, like Caroline, who's pictured with a big drink, and it's like she's on a beach somewhere or something. She's actually in her back garden, but really humorous, and she's got she's done her hair up, and it's just a great image, really fun and sort of heartwarming, uplifting image. And then others that are, like Kerry and Mercedes, that are much more poignant. I mean, Mercedes, because they always have a caption with them when they're posted on Facebook. Mercedes, for example, the Dreaming of Spain one, she always thought of being able, she felt like, I can get home in 2.5 hours, which, to be honest, traveling across, England, you can take you 2.5 hours or more. But suddenly that disappeared when she went into lockdown. She couldn't get a flight home. She couldn't go home. She couldn't see her family. So that was quite, and she said she literally had been dreaming a lot more about being at home in Spain since the lockdown. So some of them are really poignant. Carrie had, sort of posted quite a poignant message as well, quite sad in some ways. And, and then, for everyone, I think that, the mixture of the word and the image, which I always love. I always love having kind of captions with them and things like that. I do use quite a lot of language in my artwork as well, over if you look back at some of the older pieces as well. So, some of them were just about adapting, like Evie doing her she's a little gymnast and loves her gymnastics, but she's getting all her coaching by Zoom. And I think, in a way, what they reflect is all different aspects for all of us in some ways. There are sometimes we think, oh yeah, lockdown is great. I'm getting to do this, which I wouldn't normally have time for. I'm getting to do that. But other aspects, we might really struggle with. So each of them is a little microcosm of something to do with lockdown. And I think, putting them on Facebook, it was really gratifying to see the responses that came in from people, and the comments that were posted from people. And it was clear that a lot of them really hit a nerve, and spoke to people, which is what you always want. You want your art to speak to people, to resonate, to mean something.
Absolutely.
So that's what it seemed to do. It seemed to capture not necessarily how we feel all the time, but just different aspects of the way we feel at different times during this, what has been a far more protracted period of lockdown than I think any of us ever expected. At one point I was thinking, oh no, I'm really enjoying doing this, and lockdown's going to end soon and I won't have any more pictures. And of course it's dragged on and on and on, much more than we expected. So yeah, it's been a really, far more interesting. I didn't go into it with this big idea. I thought, maybe I'd get 3 or 4 pictures out of it, but I'm on my 10th, 11th picture now, and still going strong, still getting people sending them.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things about art is it's the process. Where you start off with, the thing that you think you're going to do doesn't always turn out, and the big project you think everybody's going to love, sometimes people just look at it blankly and then move on to something else. Yeah. And then sometimes you hit a nerve, and you did with me. I saw the images, I thought, and they did hit. I mean, the Mercedes one hit me because, I was separated from my partner for 3 months because of it, and so that sort of resonated with me. The other one the one that really got to me was the one with Caroline. Because I've been thinking about my experiences in the lockdown and also other people's experience, and it was almost, I think you said she was born to be in isolation, and it really hit me because we get a lot of commentary about how terrible the lockdown is, and how there's a big mental health problem connected to it, this kind of thing. But actually, I did struggle for the first couple of weeks, there's no doubt, but then actually where I live is extremely busy place. And for the first time, I could look out my window and I could hear the birds singing. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about a deadline for work. I mean, I know a lot of people had to work, and I know people had different experiences. I had a financial crisis, everything, but actually the world froze just for a bit, and all the normal shit that we have to deal with was gone. And so this idea, I sometimes sort of like, I wish we could go back to it, obviously we don't want to, and
Yeah, I think that is a really important point, because here, I don't know what it was like over in Spain, but here, where I live, I'm in the East End of London, and the sky, the blue of the sky was much more intense. You could definitely
Mm.
hear the birds. I don't know if the birds were singing more, or if it just was that low level hum that you
Well, in
get
some
from the
places,
traffic. Yeah,
animals did come back into spaces they weren't
yeah,
normally were. You know, it was.
yeah. Yeah, there's pictures of like sheep in playgrounds and things
I mean,
like
I
that,
think there was
aren't
a.
there?
Yeah, well, I think it was a whole. I mean, for me, it was an environmental crisis. It was part of the environmental movement for me. But actually, what it did is because it paused capitalism's sort of machine for a little bit.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think, although there was a lot of people who had, struggled with it, and we will still, I think it also had an element of opening up people's eyes and thinking, actually, the world
Mm,
doesn't have to be quite like this.
mm.
That kind of thing. I mean, I liked the one. Is it Ted and his hair?
Yeah, he
Because
dyed
it's
his
like,
hair. Bless him.
yeah, it's like,
That was lovely. Yeah,
so he's allowed. He doesn't, because he's not going to school. He can have red hair for the first time.
yeah.
That
He
kind
can
of
express himself. Yeah.
that was what got me about the series, that you were talking about new freedoms that people were feeling, and maybe some positive messages in a negative situation. The last one I just want to comment on, though, was Jackie's one, because we've had Jackie on the show, and,
Yeah.
and she she's a very she's a very articulate and strong character. She says what she
Mm,
thinks, and the
mm,
one you had on of her of basically her crying, every
mm,
day. And
mm,
people that listen to the show with Jackie will maybe have a better insight now if they look to that, what she was talking about, because I think
mm.
a balance of a piece of artwork is quite often quite important. You talk about the positives, you talk about the unusual, you talk about the comical, but there you had something quite painful, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that again, it was about capturing something maybe that a lot of people would be able to identify, and particularly those working in frontline services. By frontline, I mean it's a bit of a false dichotomy, the kind of frontline back office, isn't it? But
Mm.
people working directly with other people and under enormous strain, and just being really open. I mean, it was such an amazing comment that she made about it, because it was, really open about what she was going through, that she was crying every day. I think a lot of people would find it hard to admit to that. And what
Definitely.
was so moving about what Jack said, was that she was completely open about it, and she actually saw that as not being something to be embarrassed about or ashamed of. This was a normal human reaction to the huge strain
Mhm.
that she was under, and that very close up image of her face as well, that it was very, very kind of close up. um so yeah, I think that is something that a lot of people, would look at that and maybe think, God, yeah, it is normal to feel like this. It is normal to feel like I want to cry every day. And of course, we get a lot of housing workers who are working very directly with very, very vulnerable people with very complex problems, who are very ill judged by society. They're damned by society, and they're having to deal with all of those things. So there's not a lot of trust for people that they see as being in authority and in a position of power. And I think a lot of them, can kind of identify with that sense of, just trying to do this impossible job all the
Mm.
time, but made even harder by lockdown. And I think that was a really important. It's one of the. They're all important to me, obviously, but that was a really important aspect to be captured as part of the series, the lockdown series.
Yeah, I think what we're kind of talking about here is an unusual way of talking about how consciousness changes in a crisis situation. Because we all go along with our mundane lives, and we're always told by the news and the media that nothing ever changes, and we always get a pessimistic approach to how the world will be. As socialists and revolutionaries, we're often too optimistic sometimes, but in
Yeah.
general, we have that view that things can change, and I think for many people with the shock of the corona, I mean, not even to talk about the economic things that will come and the movements that will come after, but just the shock of that must change people's minds. And when I looked at your in preparation for this chat, I had a re-look at your website, and I haven't looked at it for many years. A couple of years, probably 3 or 4 years, I haven't looked at it. I thought, oh, you've done a nice job. You've tidied it up very nicely. I thought it looked very good. And then I noticed then I noticed in the corner something new that you hadn't had before, and that's you'd written 3 articles also during the lockdown, it would seem, because if I see the dates correct, I think you've written 3 articles, and one on Diego Rivera, one on Paula Rigo, and one on Picasso. And first of all, I thought they were very nice, concise, historic articles, which also related to the present day. So I think they're good reference points to those artists. But I thought, this is interesting, and I had a question for you. Is you did this series of paintings, which is, to do something creative in the lockdown is important. But why did you start to write these articles? What was behind that in your mind?
This hadn't been part of any kind of long-term plan for the website or anything. It was really prompted by the lockdown and the fact that I've got more time during the lockdown. I'm not traveling, I'm not going out to a lot of demos. The first, I suppose, the first kind of prompt for it is really to continue my own education. Which is something I've always done as a trade unionist. I've done lots of different kinds of training, and you're always learning on the job as a trade unionist, and not wanting to lose that sense of learning and developing my consciousness. And it instills a discipline. Trying to write an article or an essay on something really instills a kind of disciplined approach for it. I've got to really check what I'm doing. I've got to try and think about, how I'm communicating and things like that. So those two seem to kind of go together. So kind of why now literally was around just having more time, which again, I think from the lockdown is something that some people have certainly experienced, the ability to do things, even to cook. There was something about people are doing more cooking for their families, cooking stuff rather than just buying off the shelf meals. Like, who'd have thought the reason people buy off the shelf meals was because, and feed them to their kids, which they get criticized for, is just because they haven't got the time, because we are so driven all the time to use every minute, as part of our kind of work and caring, that we don't have the time to do other things. So it was just gave me an opportunity to do something I really hadn't had time to do before. And, I hope that what I wanted to do with the articles, and people can tell me whether I've succeeded or not, and I'm very happy for any constructive feedback, because it is a bit new. So was just to see art very much in its context of its time. Each of those artworks that's focused on in the 3 articles, and there's a series of kind of 10 that I've plotted out, was of, had something to say about its time, and also I felt kind of resonated with things going on, that we would be able to identify today as well. So it wasn't that they were of their time and kind of shut off from us today. They should speak to us today. So obviously with Guernica, it's a commentary on war. Well, we haven't done away with war. With Paula Rego, she's talking about abortion. That's still very much a huge issue about the ability to choose for hundreds of thousands of women. One of the really shocking things that came out when I was doing the research is just how many countries don't even allow it, even for medical reasons. Even for medical reasons, they won't allow it, let alone as part of a choice that, if that a woman cut myself off, can make over her own body. So, it was trying to and put that in the context of their times, which, in a couple of them was, they were going through quite kind of revolutionary times in their own countries. So it was just that sort of broader, putting them into that context and trying to see them as part of the political dialogue. They're not separate from it. Art is not separate from the political dialogue. It is always part of it. And I think those works really drew that out, or allowed me in kind of looking at them to draw that out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think understanding the history of artists and struggle together. I mean, it's one of the key things of this podcast, is the question of the artist and the workers movement and the interrelationship between the two. And I think you've drawn out there very well. And I think it's an important point that if we look back in history, some of the greatest art is done and created around the greatest periods of human struggle. And I think, let's be honest, we're in a period of great human struggle. We have the economic problems of capitalism, we have the coronavirus stuff, we have the impending environmental crisis. Humanity's on the line, and the next years are not going to be ones of social peace, I don't think. I think we can see that with the Black Lives Matter movement that's erupted, and a number of other things that we need to learn from our history. And I think for me, seeing you put those articles next to your work was a good balance to say, yeah, let's learn what actually happens. But it brings to my mind, what is the role of the artist? It's not a secondary thing to the political struggle. And so how is you and me and others artists listening to this, how do you think we should put ourselves? How do you think we should organize ourselves? Or do you think we should, do you think we're just part of, we're just a reflection of the movement? Or do you think we should be deeper inside the movement? Do you have any opinions on that?
Definitely the latter, but don't ask me how we go about it. I mean, the biggest problem, isn't it, I think, that faces any activist, any socially, any politically conscious activist is around time. There are always 10 different things you could be doing. Sometimes you'll have, pre-lockdown and even kind of death by Zoom during lockdown, where, there are 10 different things you could be going along to and listening into and taking part in. So it's how do you carve out a space to do that? And art can sometimes seem, and sometimes it has felt for me like it's had to be pushed very much onto the back burner. That it's always been, after I've done this and after I've done that and after I've done the next thing, then maybe if I've got a little bit of time left, I will be able to spend a bit of time on my art. But I think what we haven't got in the movement, we haven't got any kind of real artist organisation. We haven't got that. We haven't got a forum. What you're doing is pretty unique in that sense, is trying to get artists together and to talk to each other and to communicate and to think about some of these questions. And I think, it is really important. Art doesn't play one role, does it? It doesn't play one role in society. It won't play one role during any kind of upheavals. And I agree with you that things are just not going to go back to the way we were. If you look at around the world before the pandemic, there were so many uprisings going on, and you wouldn't have known about most of them if you just listened to the BBC. But as long as you've got access to other things, from Hong Kong to the Middle East to just about to South America, just any country almost seemed to have some kind of protests and uprisings going on, and a lot of them were around democracy and democratic control and things like that, which is what it all kind of comes back to in the end. And if you look at Black Lives Matter, a lot of when I've been out on the Black Lives Matter protests, there's been loads of placards that people have done themselves at home with George Floyd's image on there. So people have been using art even as part of that movement, just in a very kind of homemade, with loads of homemade placards and banners. You've mentioned sort of political cartoons, and obviously that's got a huge history. And it is a great way to challenge authorities' bullshit, is through, political cartoons. And I think the question, and maybe one of the problems that we have, is how do those images get out to people? How do they get disseminated to people? Because there is so much control, really, still by authority on, what people see and what information people receive. And that sort of hasn't yet been broken down. We haven't found, social media helps a little bit, but I'm not sure that that's been sort of completely done. Graffiti art is another way that art really, and that's probably the most accessible. And that was one of the points that Diego Rivera made, that it's the most proletarian form of art, because it could be seen by everyone. Generally, it's not controlled. Access to it is not controlled. And of course you have very intelligent kind of socially and politically conscious artist like Banksy, who is going to be one of the people that I'm going to cover as well. In graffiti art, but in a lot of other countries, graffiti art is very much accepted as a genuine art form, not as vandalism. So, and I think we have an aim as socialist artists, which is that in a socialist society, art would not be a commodity. It would not be about a financial value, that a price. Well, how much is this painting worth? Which is the best painting? Which is the best type of painting? And how do we make money out of the process of what artists do? And in a socialist society, you wouldn't. That wouldn't be the case. You wouldn't have that commodification of it. And so, as artists who are also socialists, we have a common aim right from the start. We have a common sort of cause, if you like. But what we haven't done really is organise around that. That's a bit of a rambling answer, but I do feel we haven't sort of. Yeah.
Well, I'll let you roll with it, because it's one of the central questions of this podcast is the relationship between the workers' movement, the left, and the artists. Because I'm of a very strong mind that the workers' movement is often slow, is often not sharp enough. Often we put that down to political differences in leadership. Yeah, and it's true. It is that. Often in the art world, you see the opposite, because an artist, if they're true to themselves, are always trying to be fresh. They're always trying to challenge something they see in front of them. How it comes out, whether it's good or bad or whatever people like it, is kind of irrelevant. But there are always people in general who are pushing against something, or trying to express it because it's stuck in their throat, or whatever what way it might be. And in that sense, it's a political act. So for me, when we look at the need to change society and the need to make the movement to do that strong, then we really need to start fusing certain elements together. And I certainly think it's not the same everywhere. And we're going to do some podcasts from people from Latin America in the future. And one of the reasons I'm going to do that is to juxtapose the different attitudes towards art and culture within the left and the workers' movement. And I think there are some. And in Britain, I think there is an attitude of, well, art is a middle class thing, really, and it's been imprinted into working class minds that it's that. And of course, it's not. Political and artistic expression is very much part of the movement. A quick question for you that might link with some of the other podcasts I'm doing. So you class yourself as an artist and as a worker, or as an artist worker? Or how would you classify? Because some people I say you're an artist then. And Jackie was a good case in point. And she said, well, I'm not an artist. And I said, well, you're performing poetry on Facebook. I think that's quite close, So where would you put yourself in that spectrum?
I suppose, you started off by saying, a trade unionist. I suppose that is, it's the kind of most public face, I suppose, of my identity, if you like. That's where I would put myself as a trade unionist. I think we do have a bit of an issue with the idea of somebody saying, oh, I'm an artist, that it can sound, unless you are actually working as an artist and that is the job you're being paid for in some capacity, it can sound like you are a bit up yourself. You can sound like a bit, I get like, oh, I'm an artist. But you are, that is part of your living and everything. So and I think it's not the kind of thing that you would be able to say in I don't know, in when you're introducing yourself, when people say, what do you do? I would never say, oh, I'm an artist. I would always say, oh, I'm a trade unionist, I'm a housing activist.
It sort of sticks in you almost have to put a slightly posh accent on. Oh, yes, I'm an artist. Did I show you my latest work? And would you like to look at my website? And actually, it's a real frustration in my whole life, personally speaking. Because from a very young age, I found artistic expression really good, and I was never able to put the two together. It was always like I was either a worker or an activist or an artist,
Yeah.
Now I don't give a shit. I'm going to say what I think I am, If I want to have a bit of identity politics and call myself an artist, I'll do it. But I also want to challenge this concept in working class culture, in particularly in Britain, actually an artist is somebody who is there is something about it that's important. It is a mental.
Especially with the visual arts. I mean, to say you're a singer, or to say even that you're a poet or a writer, somehow doesn't sound, hasn't been made to sound as wanky as saying that you are an artist, frankly, for somehow the visual arts have ended up in that kind of position, really. And, I think the other split is we don't organize around art. There's loads of my comrades, when I started putting my work up on Facebook, which is, some people might think very big-headed, but he was like, sort of, saying this is part of what I do. And loads of other comrades put up work that they were doing as well. And I had never known a lot of these people ever did any kind of, artistic expression. But suddenly they felt, I'm going to put mine up as well. And it was, I was thinking, why haven't we organised around this? Why haven't we organised as artists within our party, within the movement, as you say, within the wider movement? Why haven't we? We're all people who have got the skills of organising, because we're doing it every single day as trade unionists, as activists in different spheres. But we haven't transferred those skills around art and what we see.
I think one of the problems is that people don't always see that it's a class struggle issue, and it is. For example, pay to play. It's this mixture between hobby and work. And most young people who get into, let's say, singing rather than being an artist, or being in a band, a local band, it's a good way that a lot of young people enter into the art world. And they get into it. And of course, the first gigs they don't get paid for because they're probably a load of shit. And then after a while, they practice a lot and they get better. And then they're pulling in their mates and extra people. And before long, they've got a little following, maybe not great because they haven't got the publicity, but, they're a respected local band. Now, often that's the end of it, because you can't invest. Being an artist is a huge investment in materials, and particularly for music, is a good case in point, and stonemasonry is another one. But if you do these events and you don't get paid, and in fact you end up paying to play, you end up paying for the taxi to take your guitars, and you end up, maybe you get a pint of beer off the landlord or something like that, or maybe you get a little percentage, even. It's not enough. This is, for me, it's a trade union issue. This, for me, is an issue of struggle. And I think often we expect that somebody will give the art that they do for free because it's just something they do in their spare time. And I think there's a difficult question there, because for artists, I think anybody who makes art to make money is not an artist in my book. I think you make art because it comes pouring out of you. The problem is that you give that away, and we're all readily give our work away in the same time as we live in this capitalist society that commoditizes everything. And so there's a real problem here. And this is why I think the workers' movement has to take it up, not just as in you should pay those young people for playing, but actually, the workers' movement needs to understand that culture is part of their remit as well. Political parties of the left have to grasp that. And I'll be honest, very few do. Even some of the better political activists and the better parties, they don't get it. So, how we pull that together is an open question, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, for me, what I wanted to do was sculpture. I went to art college. I didn't finish my degree at art college. I was a dropout. But for me, I wanted to be a sculptor, and it's I couldn't afford a studio space. Painting is fine, and even the mixed media artworks that I do, which are still kind of generally flat surfaces. Those you can kind of store. You don't need a huge amount of space for, and I don't need a huge amount of space for what I'm doing, particularly working a lot with inks, because you only need a tiny quantity. So it's not one of the ones. But if I'd have had the ability to go to a studio somewhere, it would have been sculpture that I would have developed instead of painting, or maybe as well as painting. It's not.
No, Well, I
Yeah.
think at some point we'll have you over to my studio then, and you can do some of these. I mean, the truth is that I'm a stone worker, and for
Yeah.
all my life I've built garden patios, and it's evolved, because the stone's been around me, But actually, the work I do actually doesn't really pay a living as an artist. If I
Mm,
do it as a garden designer or something like that, I would be making money, because the
yeah.
costs are so high to run. I have to run two studios. The money that comes in goes out, and there's very little wage, and
Yeah.
that's because it's an art. The only way is to get enormous amount of payments, and then a bit like the Diego Riviera article that you wrote, you kind of have to sell yourself to the super rich. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
not sure that's going to be. I mean, maybe it's that comfortable with him. It doesn't sit very well with me. And anyway, I don't think they want sculptures that I would do.
Mm. I think the other way that it is an issue for the movement. I think that kind is it's a really good question, because years ago, 20, 30 years ago, councils would give grants to community groups to put on art. Local councils would do that. They had exhibition spaces. We've actually got a small exhibition space local to me, but most of these have been closed down now. The especially in London, the value of those units is too high as commercial, that they don't want to use it for kind of community projects. Thousands of community centres have closed down, which obviously catered for a very wide range of different types of art: poetry, reading, writing, and they would have classes, and they would have, all sorts of events going on. They would really make it accessible to people. All of that has been taken away through austerity, all of that, and even before then, to be honest, all of that has gone. So those routes into people. Now, that is a question, and that is a demand, if you like, that the trade union movement and the wider labour movement could take up, but is not taking up at the moment, because we're looking at so many of the very desperately needed services, youth centres and things like that are also being closed down. So it's got pushed right behind, and it became a bit of a joke at one time, wasn't it? Oh, they'll give money to any old group who just claims to be doing something, and it was that that narrative of undermining it first and then cutting it,
Yeah.
paving the way to cutting it. People won't protest. Why should we spend money on an exhibition of abstract paintings or something like that? That it's trivial, it's stupid, it's not what a council should be doing. So I think those kind of demands are not even part of it, and it is up to us, I suppose, to do something about that. If we recognise that, then nobody's going to do it for us. We've got to do it for ourselves. So we probably should think about how we put that.
Well, I think that's a good way to actually cut it.
Yeah.
That we run out a bit of time and space now, but actually, I like that's a good way to finish it. It's up to us. And I hope you'll come back on the show later on. I mean, there's a whole load of issues that are going to develop, particularly around cuts. But I think one of the things in the next period, there's going to be a lot of stuff more that we can talk about. So thanks very much for coming on the show and giving us your opinions and sharing your art. The more articles you do, I'll share them on the podcast Facebook pages and the rest, and people can have a look, and we'll continue the dialogue. Yeah.
Brilliant, and keep up the good work. You are providing a very, very vital service there that nobody else is doing. I mean, what you're doing, I can't see anybody else doing. So, your drive and your energy in getting things like this going, I think, are just fantastic. And I'd love to be involved. I'm very honoured to be part of it, really. So, thank you.
Well, we'll see how the first batch of podcasts go, and see if it doesn't send me completely mental and the rest of the team that we're putting together, and then hopefully we can put it on a stronger footing, and and get more collaborators, because the way to do art is sometimes it's just your own thing in your bedroom, but actually sometimes you need to be in part of a collective, and if that's what we need to build to get some of these things changed, that's what we should do.
Yeah. Well done, Rob. Yeah.
See you later now.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay. You take care.
Okay, then. So we're uploading that interview up to Paul in the Outa-space station. Hey, Paul, are you there?
I'm here, Robbie.
Cool, man. So what did you think of that one?
Well, okay, just lots of stuff, yeah, and sort of quite thrilling and difficult to do justice to everything. So I guess we're just gonna have to accept we won't hit everything. But first of all, I just want to say how much I like the portraits, because I really thought there's something going on there. Like there's a sort of I wrote down that life affirming, celebratory, semi-Warholian pop art style portraits.
Nice,
I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, I would just say warm and human. But I like the way you put it. I think when I've always liked her work, but these particular ones, because of the time that they're talking about and the emotions that they're talking about, and how they kind of link to what we're going on about a lot. Warm, human, and kind of socialist, eh?
That's what I kind of got from it, because she has a sort of a way of kind of celebrating the beauty of her subjects, even though they're, and I don't mean this in any way an insulting way, even though they just feel like everyday people, she seems to sort of draw something memorable.
I think that's something you got there, Paul, because actually that's the important part of it, isn't it? That they're everyday people.
Yeah, they're not all supermodels and stuff. There's something, and basically, so that really meant that has got something deeply social conscience, and it's not even something I think that she's trying to do. I think it's partly what she brings to the party of these rendering these people, and going to Suzanne. I mean, you've got the artist, which you got into that with her about the amateur artist in inverted commas. You weren't having that offer.
Well, no, we don't accept that, Susan. We don't accept that you call yourself amateur.
Yeah, that's indeed. Like I thought, let's keep that thread going throughout the series. Housing, and you've got the housing worker side of it, which really, like, I mean, that's such an important piece, such an important kind of piece of work, like being involved in, especially right now when all these housing crises going on. And then you've got the trade unionist. And the question that we're really pursuing in these conversations with the interviews between you and I is like whether or not it's this partly the role of the artist, the definition of the artist, the funding of the artist, and the acceptance of the artist also by everyone around them. We talked about the squeamishness that some of us have felt about wanting to describe ourselves or not as an artist. And I think with Suzanne, we've got a really powerful example of the actual ethos of everything that your podcast is about. And because you've got someone who's kicking it in 3 tiers. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, definitely. I mean, she does represent. She does represent quite clearly. She sees herself as a trade unionist, and then that's central to the workers' movement. She's quite clearly a talented artist, and then she's the activist, on housing and on other things in between. I think, she does encapsulate somewhat. So what we're talking about,
and like cross-referencing with her work on her website about Diego Riviera as well, her humanistic concern, it both defines her, it permeates through her and her work. It's just impressive. I did write a little quote here. I did write something down. I wrote, "This is an interview about the full human being, with the artistic component bracing and informing all the other elements of them as a complete and utilitarian person." And what I meant by that was, like, for her art, it wasn't just like, here we go with our discussion. It wasn't just her hobby. It wasn't just something that she aspired to one day sell and make a lot of money out of. It wasn't that either. It's kind of like the cement between the bricks of her. Like she's got like, yeah, you speak, sorry.
No, I get it. It's interesting. I mean, I can see that it's affected you. You're thinking about it. You've been looking at the images. You've read the articles.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think you're pulling out some real essence of what this particular artist is and the subject matter at hand. I think one of the things that struck me that came over in the interview quite a lot was this question of time to do your art, because, and it comes up and it'll come up all the time that art is always pushed to the back, but it's always in the forefront of reality. It's all, I mean, we don't always produce a piece of art, but it's always there, and one of the things, and it's gone in the last couple of interviews we've done, it's sort of, it's rattled around this question of, the time you have, whether you call yourself an artist or, how that's constructed is part of that. But what hit me, and it came over a number of different times in the actual interview, normally I don't have time to do this, and the lockdown provided that window of I can be myself, because certainly for me, I'm sure maybe it's the same for you and for lots of other artists, when they're doing their work, they feel content, and sometimes it's the only time they feel content. I'm not saying that's the case with Suzanne, but I think there's something really important here about the lockdown. Was terrible. It had lots of really negative things going on. But one thing it did do is shine a little light on freedom, a little light on, actually, she talks about cooking, yeah? And there's lots of people complaining about not feeding your kids properly. We live in this fucking robotic world, which turns, everything into squares, if you know what I mean by that. And I thought she encapsulated that quite well, that, actually, here's somebody who's clearly got a lot of talent, prioritizes other things, that's fine, but doesn't have the time to do it. And how many out there listening to this? You don't have time, do you? Why not? Yeah. Why do we live in a world where the most beautiful thing that we can do, the most creative thing we can do, we don't have time for? That's what hit me about it. I mean, I don't know if you got that feel too.
I agree with everything you said, and I think what it led on to, and I'm leading a couple points. I'd love to pick up the eye and do this one because there's a lot there. I think we're going to come back to those points in other interviews, by the way, about lockdown and our catching ourselves in the act of being human for once. And the world stopped when we got off, all that stuff. So I won't do it now. Led on to a great set. Oh, sorry, mate, talking.
No, it was cutting out a little. Yeah, it was the signal going up to you, Paul. It cut a little bit. Yeah. Technology is much better than it used to be, but you're still a fucking long way away up there, fella. So occasionally we get a little cut out. So go on, give us what you're saying.
I've got to fix that microwave transmitter. Basically, yeah.
Or stop putting your head in it. One or the other.
Yeah, the helmet only protects me from so much.
Get that helmet on, Paul. The door is open.
Yeah, indeed. Now, what I've got here is it led on to in my mind, it was the closing third of the interview. I think there was a lot more going on, but there was this. You started discussing this issue, and it came up in the Diego Rivera story that she's talked about in her essay, and basically funding of the art and all that sort of thing. I actually made some notes here because I was so entranced by this, and I actually started writing down, do you think we need to call art something else? And I'm not saying we should, because if this artist thing, it's just as an idea, I don't mean literally do it, I just mean, do we need to consider something here? Because what she was saying and what you were talking about was, it's the whole thing about bands forming when they're teenagers, and that entering them into a language of communication and art, and it being at that level with their community. I mean, like, so many bands used to come out of their community. I hope they still do. I don't know what goes on anymore, but like, or hip hop artists or whatever. I think with the these sort of the kids that come out of the estates and their music, there's an element of that too. Not that it's something I know anything about, but at least you can see a through line from their environment, their community, the people they know, and the music they make for the people around them. And of course, that's how it should always start. And basically, And the whole talk about capitalism, didn't Suzanne say something fascinating about, in a capitalist system, how do you really validate or verify the value of a painting? Really, truly, why is it getting this financial verification or validation for something that, quite frankly, it transcends all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I found she talked about she was thinking about the future, and she talked about, socialism. Art wouldn't be a commodity, and it sort of leads me what you were just saying there about maybe we should call it a different name. I don't know. We should be getting into that because we'll get a little bit lost there. But there's a point there, and the point for me, I often think about this, and I'm never sure that I'm right, and maybe I'm throwing a big bomb in near the end of our little moment, but. Maybe in a socialist society or in a society where things are equal, there wouldn't be a word called art because everything would be acceptable that it's art.
Yeah. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. So that might be a better way of putting it.
Oh, okay, Paul. Well, is there anything you could anything you want to say that kind of rounds it off for you? I know it's a big one. There's loads to be said. We're basically a little comment on it here. Is there anything you could think that could?
There were two quotes. If I can get my Diego Riviera, there were two quotes that the first one really made me think of you. And it was, I just thought, when you saw this, you must have been having like a party in your head. Diego Riviera, art as a weapon. I just thought he must love that.
Yeah. And then there was a weapon. It's an interesting thing. We should come back to this about, because it seems I'm starting to get a reputation about how I view art as a tool to the revolution. It's not exactly what I think. Definitely interesting. What was the second one then, Paul? What was the second thing you wanted to say? The second
one, we'll sign out with this.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, an artist is above all a human being to the core.
Hello?
Did that not come across?
No, you disappeared. I think it was Diego Riviera intervening and saying, "Hey, you can't use my quote without copyright." No, do it again, Paul, because
from the side.
It's that space station business again. You cut out there. No, go on, do it again, and we'll finish the show on it.
Sunspots getting in the way of our communication.
There's a problem with doing these things live.
Give me one moment.
Go on. Put on your best middle class voice to read it out to us.
Think we'll do it in Radio 4 voice.
Yes, I want you to do it in Radio 4 voice.
All right. Here you go. An artist is above all a human being, profoundly human to the core. If the artist can't feel everything that humanity feels, if the artist isn't capable of loving until he forgets himself and sacrifices himself if necessary, if he won't put down his magic brush and head the fight against the oppressor, then he isn't a great artist. Diego Riviera.
And we'll leave it on that one. Thanks very much, Paul. See you next time.
All right. See you next time, man.
I believe in Puff the Magic Dragon, Hana Lee and Jackie Papers too. I believe that Alice went to Wonderland last night and Dorothy got home by clicking her ruby red shoes. I believe in fairy tales and nonsense, magic wands and unicorns and elves. I believe the tooth fairy is overworked and broke, but I don't really believe in myself. But I can close my eyes and conjure up an old forgotten spell, but even after acupuncture, wine and cigarettes and 5 deep breaths, slowly count to 12. Then I make believe in myself. I believe that knights in shining armor gallop in and always save the day. But 9 times out of 10 the fire-breathing dragon reappears on yet another page. I believe that my imagination runs away from me each chance it gets. And when I give chase, it just quickens up its pace. When I try to ignore it, it persists. But I can close my eyes and conjure up an old forgotten spell. But even after acupuncture, wine and cigarettes, and 5 deep breaths, slowly count to 12. Then I make believe in myself. Hey, at least I don't believe in closet monsters. I'm pretty sure I don't believe in hell. Sometimes I believe that my wish will come true when I toss a penny in a wishing well. Oh yeah. I believe that Jack can climb a beanstalk if Prince Charming can climb Rapunzel's hair. And shit, I admit Cinderella's slipper fit. It seems there's happy endings everywhere. I believe that everyone is special. I know for sure 'cause everybody dies. And I could lie and say that I believe in myself. Maybe so, but I don't know. That could just be a cheap disguise. And I can close my eyes and conjure up an old forgotten spell. But even after acupuncture, wine and cigarettes, 5 deep breaths, slowly count to 12. Gotta make believe in myself. Oh, help me make believe in myself. Oh, everybody make believe in
Okay, that was Acupuncture, Wine and Cigarettes by Aaron Byrne. Aaron Byrne is an artist from the Texas in the USA. Also, Aaron wrote the music, the original music, to the introduction to this podcast and to the outro to this podcast. Our producer, Jonas Langer, put a little bit of his own magic on top of it as well and did a slight remix. So then, you should be hearing another little bit of Aaron right about, well, now. We hope you enjoyed the show today. If you have something to say, or something to play, or just want to hear more of our podcasts, then you can get in contact with us at outa-space.com. That's outa-space.com. Okay, take care now.